The Wizard of Oz. The production behind this classic was a chaotic mess that'd make any modern set shut down instantly. First off, the original Tin Man, Buddy Ebsen, had to leave after being hospitalized because of a severe reaction to aluminum dust in his makeup. His lungs were so damaged he couldn't continue, and they replaced him with Jack Haley, whose makeup used aluminum paste instead. Safer, but still toxic. Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch, suffered second-degree burns on her face and third-degree burns on her hand after a trapdoor malfunctioned during a fiery exit. She was off set for over a month, and her green copper-based makeup was so toxic it couldn't be ingested. Even her stunt double got injured during another fire-related mishap. Judy Garland, who was only 16, was forced into a strict regimen that included a diet of chicken soup, coffee, and up to 80 cigarettes a day to suppress her appetite. She was given amphetamines during the day and barbiturates at night to sleep, which studios commonly did at the time to maintain control over young actors. The lion costume weighed over 90 pounds and was made from real lion skin, which became unbearably hot under the lights. Burt Lahr reportedly had to rest frequently to avoid overheating. Filming stretched out for months with constant script rewrites and director changes. Victor Fleming wasn't even the original director. He replaced Richard Thorpe, then left before completion. King Vidor ended up filming the Over the Rainbow sequence. The studio even used asbestos-based fake snow during the poppy field scene, despite health concerns already known in the late 1930s. The Lion King. The origin of this animated favorite is way murkier than its sunny Savannah setting. Disney long claimed it was its first original story, but it bears striking resemblances to the Japanese anime Kimba the White Lion from the 1960s. Both feature a lion cub who loses his father, faces exile, then returns to take his place as king. The similarities go beyond plot. Some scenes, character designs, and even names match up closely. Despite this, Disney maintained the film was developed independently and never credited Osamu Tezuka, Kimba's creator. Behind the scenes, the project wasn't even considered a priority. Most of Disney's top animators were working on Pocahontas at the time, which the studio expected to be the bigger hit. The Lion King was handed to the so-called B team. During development, it was referred to as Bambi in Africa. The original concept leaned more into a naturalistic documentary tone, but shifted after several rewrites. Jeffrey Katzenberg pushed for more dramatic themes, which brought in the Shakespearean influence, mostly Hamlet, including the uncle-nephew, betrayal, and ghostly father figure. Musically, Elton John and Tim Rice were brought on after earlier drafts of songs were scrapped. Hans Zimmer came in later and overhauled the score, adding heavy African musical influences, despite originally having no experience with animation. The Wildebeest Stampede took over 2 years to animate using new computer software, which was still being tested during production. The team even had to create new systems for dust and shadow rendering. Despite being seen as a side project, it exploded in popularity and eventually became one of Disney's highest-grossing films of all time. By the way, if you guys want to subscribe, I'm gonna start posting a lot here. Thanks. Anyways, babe. The charming talking pig movie had a surprisingly intense and technical production. It was directed by Chris Noonan and produced by George Miller, who's more known for his Mad Max films. The movie used a combination of real animals, animatronics, and early CGI, which was groundbreaking for the time. More than 40 different pigs were trained and rotated throughout filming, since piglets grow quickly and would outgrow the role in just a few weeks. Each pig had to be dyed to match the main character's color to keep continuity, and they were trained for months before filming even began. The animatronic animals were created by Jim Henson's Creature Shop. These puppets were controlled with radio signals and had to sync their mouth movements to the voice actors' lines. It was one of the earliest uses of digital mouth replacement on real animals. Visual effects teams used a technique where they'd digitally alter the animals' snouts frame by frame to make it look like they were speaking, which was extremely time-consuming and expensive for the mid-90s. The crew even built miniature sets to make the animals appear larger in scale, adding another layer of complexity. Animal rights groups monitored the entire process closely. No animals were harmed, but several controversies arose later, including confusion over the fate of the pigs after production. The film's release was also met with criticism by the pork industry, which saw it as pushing a vegetarian agenda. Despite that, it earned multiple Academy Award nominations and even won for Best Visual Effects, something rare for a film led by a pig. Its production was technical, risky, and much more complicated than most people ever realized. The Sound of Music. While it looks like an innocent musical romp through the Alps, the production was full of problems. Filming in Salzburg, Austria sounded scenic, but bad weather constantly delayed shooting. The famous opening scene where Julie Andrews spins on the hill was filmed from a helicopter flying in tight circles. The wind from the blades kept knocking her over after each take, and they had to film it multiple times to get one usable shot. Julie Andrews also had trouble keeping a straight face while working with the children, especially during the puppet scene, which took days to shoot because of constant laughter and coordination problems. Christopher Plummer, who played Captain Von Trapp, disliked the movie so much he called it the sound of mucus, and often complained about the script and his character. He also disliked the overly sentimental tone and had a hard time keeping a straight face during the musical numbers. Shooting the boat scene, where the family falls into the lake, went wrong. The youngest child, Kim Karath, couldn't swim, and Julie Andrews was supposed to catch her, but she fell in the opposite direction. Karath ended up swallowing water and had to be pulled out. The production also faced resistance from the real Von Trapp family, who felt the movie distorted their story. They didn't like the way Georg Von Trapp was portrayed, and several elements were completely fictionalized. The Nazis in the film were real, but the timeline was altered for drama. The original Broadway version had different music placements, and Rodgers and Hammerstein didn't even live to see the movie version come to life. Grease. The nostalgic high school fantasy hid some serious behind-the-scenes chaos. Olivia Newton-John was 28 when she took on the role of Sandy, and she was nervous about playing a teenager. Producers were so desperate to cast her that they rewrote the character to be Australian to match her accent. She insisted on a screen test with John Travolta to see if their chemistry worked, which luckily for them, it did. Filming was physically brutal. Temperatures at the California high school set reached over 100 degrees, especially during the dance contest scenes shot in a non-air-conditioned gym. Extras were fainting and the cast was dripping with sweat, forcing multiple retakes. The carnival finale wasn't any better. It was shot in just one day, meaning everyone was crammed into intense heat with rides running nonstop while actors tried to stay in character. The infamous skin-tight black pants Olivia wore had a broken zipper, so they had to sew her into them every day. She couldn't use the bathroom without being cut out and sewn back in. Travolta was dealing with grief over the death of his girlfriend Diana Hyland during filming, and he threw himself into the role to cope. The cast was mostly made up of adults playing teens, with some in their 30s. Stockard Channing, who played Rizzo, was 33. Despite the film's cheery tone, the themes were often criticized for promoting unhealthy stereotypes. Still, the soundtrack exploded, but even that had disputes. Frankie Valli's title song almost didn't happen due to contract issues, and several musical numbers were rearranged from the original stage production, Three Men and a Baby. The production behind this late 80s hit had more strange twists than most remember. Directed by Leonard Nimoy, better known as Spock, it marked his biggest box office success as a director. The film was a remake of a French movie called Trois Hommes et un Couffin, and despite its light tone, the American adaptation had its share of behind-the-scenes challenges. The set constantly had to adjust for the real infants used to play the baby. They used identical twins, as required by child labor laws, and still had to pause filming frequently since the baby's moods were unpredictable. Scenes often had to be rewritten depending on whether the babies were sleeping, crying, or just not cooperating. The actors, Tom Selleck, Ted Danson, and Steve Guttenberg, weren't used to working with infants, so they had to adapt quickly to the limitations of filming with children under 6 months old. There was also the infamous rumor about a ghost appearing in one scene. It was claimed a young boy's ghost showed up behind a curtain, spawning urban legends and conspiracy theories. In reality, it was a cardboard cutout of Ted Danson that had been accidentally left in the background. The cutout was originally part of a subplot that got deleted, but the prop wasn't removed from the set. That didn't stop audiences from freezing their VHS tapes and fueling rumors for years. Despite the comedy's commercial success, the original creators of the French film expressed disappointment over how much was changed. Still, it went on to be the highest-grossing film in the United States in 1987, which surprised everyone involved: The Little Mermaid. This late 80s Disney revival had its roots in development chaos and studio doubt. The idea to adapt Hans Christian Andersen's tragic tale started in the mid-1980s, but the original story was much darker. Early drafts stuck closer to the source material, where the mermaid dies and dissolves into sea foam. The studio shifted gears to make it more upbeat, but remnants of the original sadness still lingered in some early concept art and scripts. Howard Ashman, brought in after his success with Little Shop of Horrors, heavily influenced the tone. He restructured scenes, rewrote lyrics, and shaped the entire musical direction. He even helped cast Jodie Benson as Ariel after hearing her perform a demo. Ashman also convinced the team to move part of your world earlier in the film, which nearly got cut after a test screening bored children. He fought hard to keep it in, arguing it was essential to the character's development. Animators faced technical hurdles too. The underwater scenes required new animation techniques with over 1 million bubbles drawn by hand. They used CAPS, an early digital coloring system, to streamline some parts. Ariel's design was a composite based on live-action references, including Alyssa Milano's face and astronaut Sally Ride's hair flow in Zero Gravity. Ursula's design was inspired by the drag queen Divine, and her animation required dozens of reshoots to get the fluid tentacle movements right. The film's release came right after Howard Ashman was diagnosed with AIDS, and much of his work was done while he was already sick. Despite all this, the film helped launch what became known as the Disney Renaissance, but it almost didn't make it through production. Home Alone. The behind the scenes of this holiday staple involved budget drama, physical strain, and some sneaky studio moves. The script was written by John Hughes in just 9 days, originally pitched to Warner Brothers with a modest budget, but once filming began, production costs ballooned past the initial cap, and Warner Brothers pulled the plug. What they didn't know was that Hughes had already lined up a deal with 20th Century Fox, who picked it up mid-shutdown. The crew literally walked from one studio lot to another to resume filming under the new banner. Macaulay Culkin was handpicked by Hughes after working with him on Uncle Buck. Director Chris Columbus still auditioned other kids, but eventually gave in, realizing Hughes was right. Filming was tough on Culkin, who was juggling schoolwork and long hours on set. Most of the house interiors weren't even shot in a real home. They built the entire layout inside a high school gymnasium in Illinois, including the flooded basement and attic. Stunt doubles took serious hits, especially for Daniel Stern and Joe Pesci's slapstick scenes. Stern did his own stunts, including slipping on the stairs and getting hit with paint cans. Pesci accidentally bit Culkin's finger hard enough to leave a scar while pretending to threaten him during a scene. The tarantula scene wasn't fake. Stern agreed to have a real one crawl on his face, but the scream was dubbed in later to avoid startling the spider. The now iconic score by John Williams was a last-minute replacement after the original composer backed out. Williams changed the tone completely and was partly responsible for elevating the film from just another comedy to a long-lasting classic, Toy Story. The first fully computer-animated feature film had one of the rockiest development histories in Disney's catalog. Pixar, still a small studio at the time, partnered with Disney under a tense distribution deal. The original script went through several rewrites after Disney executives demanded the characters be edgier and more sarcastic. That version bombed in early screenings, Woody came off as mean-spirited, and the tone was too cynical. Production was shut down temporarily until John Lasseter and his team reworked the script to make the characters more likable. Tom Hanks and Tim Allen were cast after Disney pushed for big-name voices. Hanks recorded his lines during breaks between other films, and Allen was chosen after several comedians passed on the role. Every piece of animation had to be built from scratch. Pixar developed custom software to handle movement, textures, and lighting, which had never been done on this scale before. The team created over 200 models just for Woody to allow for his range of movement. Rendering each frame took hours, and one scene alone could take days to complete. A major disaster hit during production when a Pixar employee accidentally deleted most of the movie from the servers. The backup system had failed, but one technical director had a personal backup at home to restore the lost data, saving months of work. Disney originally wanted the film to go straight to video, doubting audiences would sit through a fully animated movie with no human characters. It took heavy pushing from Pixar to get a theatrical release. After release, it grossed hundreds of millions and forced the entire animation industry to rethink its approach. But without that rewrite and near data loss, the film might not have happened at all. Mary Poppins. The behind-the-scenes battle between Disney and author P.L. Travers was so intense, it dragged on for over 20 years. Walt Disney first tried to buy the film rights in the 1940s after promising his daughters he'd adapt their favorite book, but Travers rejected him repeatedly. She finally agreed in the early 1960s, but only after being guaranteed script approval. That didn't stop Disney from moving forward with changes she hated. Travers opposed almost every creative choice, from the inclusion of animation to the cheerful tone. She wanted a more faithful adaptation of her darker and stricter version of Mary. She hated the songs, especially Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and begged for them to be removed. She was banned from the movie's premiere after expressing her disgust, then cried at the final screening when she saw what had been done to her story. Julie Andrews was pregnant when she accepted the role, and Disney waited until after her baby was born to start filming. It was her film debut, and she only accepted the role after getting a pass on playing Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady. Dick Van Dyke's Cockney accent was so bad it became infamous, and even he later admitted he had no idea how it sounded. The animated sequences were revolutionary for the time, combining hand-drawn characters with live-action footage using a new sodium vapor process that required painstaking alignment. Filming on-the-wire rig scenes was rough. Andrews was repeatedly dropped or yanked abruptly, once injuring her back during the final flight scene. Despite all the conflict and physical challenges, the film swept up 5 Academy Awards and became one of Disney's biggest live-action successes. Travers refused to allow any sequels during her lifetime. Charlotte's Web, the 1973 animated film, had a complicated path from page to screen. E.B. White, the book's author, was very protective of his story and initially refused to sell the rights. He finally gave in under the condition that the adaptation stay true to the book's tone and message. Even then, White was unhappy with the final product and thought the animation and songs cheapened the story's emotional weight. The film was produced by Hanna-Barbera, better known for Saturday morning cartoons, and the animation reflected that. Budget constraints limited the visual quality, and many scenes had reused frames or simplified backgrounds. The musical numbers were written by the Sherman Brothers, who had previously worked on Mary Poppins, but critics and White himself felt the songs were unnecessary and distracting. Debbie Reynolds voiced Charlotte, but her casting wasn't the first choice. Several actresses passed on the role due to scheduling conflicts or lack of interest in animation. Paul Lynde, who voiced Templeton the Rat, recorded his lines in short sessions, and his performance was one of the few widely praised elements. Voice recording was done in isolation, meaning most of the cast never interacted, making timing and chemistry harder to achieve. Animators struggled with capturing the complexity of the spider's movements. Charlotte's web patterns had to be redrawn repeatedly to avoid looking like abstract lines. Despite White's disappointment and lukewarm reviews, the film gained popularity over time through school screenings and home video. It's one of those films that built a legacy long after its release, but behind the scenes, almost no one involved thought it would last. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? The production was one of the most technically ambitious projects of the 80s and nearly fell apart multiple times. Disney partnered with Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment, but even that powerhouse combination struggled to get funding. The film had a budget that ballooned past $50 million, a massive number at the time. Most of it went toward complex animation and effects. Every frame combining live action and animation had to be drawn by hand after being shot, requiring more than 800 artists and nearly 2 years of post-production. Robert Zemeckis directed, but he wasn't Disney's first choice due to his earlier box office flops. After Back to the Future, he had leverage. Bob Hoskins had to learn to act like animated characters were physically real. He used mime training and visual cues on set to interact with props moved by puppeteers. The stress of pretending to see tunes in every scene reportedly caused hallucinations, which didn't fade until after filming wrapped. Getting characters from rival studios to appear together was a nightmare. Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny only appear on screen at the same time because of a legal agreement requiring equal screen time. Daffy and Donald Duck also had to be matched perfectly in dialogue and action. Licensing negotiations were constant, and some characters like Popeye and Tom and Jerry couldn't be used because rights couldn't be cleared. Jessica Rabbit's animation was hand-drawn with exaggerated physics to give her an impossible look. Animators reversed some frames to make her hair move unrealistically, and her design sparked controversy even before release. Despite the chaos, the film won multiple Academy Awards and remains one of the most complex hybrids of animation and live action ever attempted. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.